welcome to tonight's version of Crackling Tales. As you can see by the way I'm dressed, the weather's getting really nice out, and so I have a couple of quick things to tell you before we get started. Tonight is our last story, and I changed it at the last minute from another story that I had planned to tell you, because this one really focuses on two things that I think are super important right now: perseverance and kindness. Tonight's story is from a short story collection called The Labors of Hercules. It's written by my favorite author, and the most popular author in the world, Agatha Christie. It's an update on some classical Greek myths. In the classical Greek myths, Hercules is given 12 labors that he must complete to atone for his sins and to become a god. In this version, Christie gives her famous Belgian detective, Hercule Poirot, the chance to complete 12 tasks that he assigns to himself that parallel those ancient myths. He couldn't be more of a polar opposite from the ancient Hercules, because Poirot is a small and fussy and cerebral man. But he decides that he can do his labors just as well as Hercules. In this story, there is no murder, there's no incredible thefts, there's no monsters, nothing like we've seen before. It's a missing person. And it shows Christie and Poirot's belief in a couple of really important things: perseverance and the power of love. This story is about the Arcadian deer. In the myth, the Arcadian deer was a legendary creature which was impossible to track down and capture, but eventually Hercules does it. And of course, nothing is impossible for Hercule Poirot. Tonight's story is The Arcadian Deer. Hercule Poirot stamped his feet, seeking to warm them. He blew upon his fingers. Flakes of snow melted and dripped from the corners of his mustache. There was a knock at the door, and a chambermaid appeared. She was a slow-breathing, thick-set country girl, and she stared with a good deal of curiosity at Hercule Poirot. It was possible that she had not seen anything quite like him before. She asked, "Did you ring?" "I did. Will you be so good as to light a fire?" She went out and came back again immediately with paper and sticks. She knelt down in front of the big Victorian grate and began to lay a fire. Hercule Poirot continued to stamp his feet, swing his arms, and blow on his fingers. He was annoyed. His car, an expensive Messaro Graz, had not behaved with that mechanical perfection which he expected of a car. His chauffeur, a young man who enjoyed a handsome salary, had not succeeded in putting things right. The car had staged a final refusal in a secondary road 1.5 miles from anywhere, with a fall of snow beginning. Hercule Poirot, wearing his usual smart patent leather shoes, had been forced to walk that 1.5 miles to reach the riverside village of Hartley Dean, a village which, though snow showing every sign of animation in the summertime, was completely moribund in winter. The Black Swan Inn had registered something like dismay at the arrival of an actual guest. The landlord had been almost eloquent as he pointed out that the local garage could supply a car in which the gentleman could continue his journey. Hercule Poirot repudiated the suggestion. His Latin thrift was offended. Hire a car? He already had a car, a large car, an expensive car. In that car and in no other car he proposed to continue his journey back to town. And in any case, even if repairs to it could be quickly effected, he was not going on in this snow until morning. He demanded a room, a fire, and a meal. Sighing, the landlord showed him to the room, sent the maid to supply the fire, and then retired to discuss with his wife the problem of the meal. An hour later, his feet stretched out toward the comforting blaze, Hercule Poirot reflected leniently on the dinner he had just eaten. True, the steak had been both tough and full of gristle. The Brussels sprouts had been large, pale, and definitely watery. The potatoes had had hearts of stone. Nor was there much to be said for the portion of stewed apple and custard which had followed. The cheese had been hard, and the biscuits soft. Nevertheless, thought Poirot, looking graciously at the leaping flames and sipping delicately at a cup of coffee, It was better to be full than empty, and after tramping snow-bound lanes in patent leather shoes, to sit in front of a fire was paradise. There was a knock at the door, and the chambermaid appeared. "Please, sir, the man from the garage is here and would like to see you." Hercule Poirot replied amiably, "Let him mount." The girl giggled and retired. Poirot reflected kindly that her account of him to her friends would provide entertainment for many winter days to come. There was another knock, a different knock, and Poirot called, "Come in." He looked up with approval at the young man who entered and stood there, looking ill at ease, twisting his cap in his hands. Here, he thought, was one of the handsomest specimens of humanity he had ever seen, a simple young man with the outward semblance of a Greek god. The young man said in a low voice, "About the car, sir. We've brought it in, and we've got it the trouble. It's a matter of an hour's work or so." Poirot said, "What is wrong with it?" The young man plunged eagerly into technical details. Poirot nodded his head gently, but he was not listening. He said to himself approvingly, "Yes, he looks like a Greek god, a young shepherd in Arcadian." The young man stopped talking abruptly. It was then that Hercule Poirot's brows knitted themselves for a second. His first reaction had been aesthetic, his second, mental. His eyes narrowed themselves curiously as he looked up. He said, "I comprehend. Yes, I comprehend." He paused and then added, "My chauffeur, he has already told me that which you have just said." He saw the flush that came to the other's cheek, saw the fingers grip the cap nervously. The young man stammered, yes, sir, I know." Poirot went on smoothly, "But you thought that you would also come and tell me yourself?" "Yes, sir, I thought I'd better." "That was very conscientious of you. Thank you." There was a faint but unmistakable note of dismissal in the last words, but he did not expect the other to go, and he was right. The young man did not move. His fingers moved convulsively, crushing the tweed cap, and he said in a still lower, embarrassed voice, "Excuse me, sir, but it's true, isn't it, that you're the detective gentleman?" Poirot said, "That is true." Red crept up the young man's face. He said, "I read a piece about you in the paper." "Yes." The boy was now scarlet. There was distress in his eyes, distress and appeal. Poirot came to his aid. He said gently, "What is it you want to ask me?" The words came with a rush now. "I'm afraid you may think it's awful cheek of me, sir, but you're coming here by chance like this. Well, it's too good to be missed, having read about you and the clever things you've done. Anyway, I said as after all, I might as well ask you. There's no harm in asking, is there?" Poirot shook his head. He said, "You want my help in some way?" The other man nodded. He said, "It's about a young lady. If you could find her for me." "Find her? Has she disappeared then?" "That's right, sir." Poirot sat up in his chair and said sharply, "I could help you, perhaps, yes, but the proper people for you to go to are the police. It is their job, and they have far more resources at their disposal than I have." The man shuffled his feet and said awkwardly, "I couldn't do that, sir. It's not like that at all. It's all rather peculiar, so to speak." Poirot stared at him and indicated a chair. "Eh bien, sit down. What is your name?" "Williamson, sir. Ted Williamson." "Sit down, Ted. Tell me all about it." "Thank you, sir." Ted drew forward the chair and sat down carefully on the very edge of it. His eyes still had an appealing, dog-like look. Poirot said gently, "Tell me." Ted Williamson drew a deep breath. "Well, you see, sir, it was like this. I never saw her but once, and I don't know her right name or anything. But the whole thing is strange, and my letter coming back and everything." "Start," said Poirot, "at the beginning. Do not hurry yourself. Just tell me everything that occurred." "Yes, sir. Well, perhaps you know Grasslawn, sir, the big house down by the river past the bridge." "I know nothing at all." "It belongs to George Sanderfield. He uses it in the summertime for weekends and parties. Quite a festive lot he has down as a rule, actresses and all that. Well, it was last June, and the wireless was out of order, and they sent me up to see to it." Poirot nodded. "So I went along. The gentleman was out on the river with his guests, and the cook was out, and his manservant had gone along to serve the drinks and all that on the launch. There was only this girl in the house, She was lady's maid to one of the guests. She let me in and showed me where the set was and stayed with me while I worked on it. And so we got to talking and all that. Nita, her name was, so she told me, and she was the lady's maid to a Russian dancer who was staying there. What nationality was she? English? No, she'd be French, I think. She had a funny sort of accent, but she spoke English all right. She was friendly, and after a bit, I asked her if she could come out that night and go to the pictures, but she said her lady would be needing her. But then she said as how she could get off early in the afternoon because there wasn't going to be back anybody from the river until late. So the long and the short of it was that I took the afternoon off without asking, and nearly got the sack for it, and we went for a walk by the river. He paused. A little smile hovered on his lips. His eyes were dreamy. Poirot said gently, "And she was pretty, yes? She was just the loveliest thing you ever saw. Her hair was like gold. It went up on each side like wings, and she had a wonderful way of tripping along. I fell for her right away, sir. I'm not pretending anything else." The young man went on. "She said as how her lady would be coming down again in a fortnight, and we fixed up to meet then." He paused. "But she never came. I waited for her at the spot she said, but not a sign of her, and at last I was bold enough to go up to the house and ask for her. The Russian lady was staying there all right, and her maid too, they said. They sent for her, they did, but when she came, it wasn't Nita at all. Just a dark, catty-looking girl. Marie, they called her. 'You want to see me?' she said, simpering all over. She must have seen I was took aback. I said, was she the Russian lady's maid, and something about her not being the one I'd seen before, and then she laughed and said the last maid had been sent away, sudden. 'What for?' I said. She shrugged her shoulders and stretched out her hands. 'How should I know?' She said I was not there." Well, it took me aback, sir. At the moment, I couldn't think of anything to say, but afterwards I plucked up the courage, and I got to see this Marie again, and I asked her to get me Nita's address. I didn't let on to her that I didn't even know Nita's last name. I promised her a present if she did what I asked. She was the kind who wouldn't do anything for nothing. Well, she got it all right for me. An address in North London it was, and I wrote to Nita there. But the letter came back after a bit, sent back through the post office with "No longer at this address" scrawled on it. Ted Williamson stopped. His eyes, those deep, blue, steady eyes, looked across at Poirot. He said, "You see how it is, sir. It's not a case for the police. But I want to find her, and I don't know how to set about it. If you could find her for me," his color deepened, "I've a bit put by. I could manage £5, or even 10. Poirot said gently, "We need not discuss the financial side for the moment. First, reflect upon this point. This girl, this Nita, she knew your name and where you work." "Oh, yes, sir." "She could have communicated with you if she had wanted to." Ted said more slowly, "Yes, sir." "Then, do you not think, perhaps—" "What you're meaning, sir, is that I fell for her, but she didn't fall for me?" "Well, that may be true in a way, but she liked me. She did like me. It wasn't just a bit of fun. And I've been thinking, sir, there might be a reason for all this. You see, it was a funny crowd she was mixed up in. She might be in a bit of trouble, if you know what I mean." "You mean she might have been going to have a child?" "Your child?" "Not mine, sir," Ted flushed. "There wasn't anything like that between us." Poirot looked at him thoughtfully. He murmured, "And if what you suggest is true, you still want to find her?" Color surged up in Ted Williamson's face. He said, "Yes, I do, and that's flat. I want to marry her if she'll have me, and there's no matter what kind of a jam she's in. If you'll only try and find her for me, sir." Hercule Poirot smiled. He said, murmuring to himself, "She had hair like wings of gold. Yes, I think this is the third labor of Hercules. If I remember rightly, that happened in Arcadian." Part 2. Hercule Poirot looked thoughtfully at the sheet of paper on which Ted Williamson had laboriously inscribed a name and address. Miss Valletta, 17 Upper Renfrew Lane. He wondered if he would learn anything at that address. Somehow he fancied not, but it was the only help Ted could give him. Number 17 Upper Renfrew Lane was a dingy but respectable street. A stout woman with bleary eyes opened the door to the knock. "Miss Valletta? Gone away a long time, she has." Poirot advanced a step into the doorway just as the door was about to close. "You can give me, perhaps, her address." "I couldn't say, I'm sure. She She didn't leave one. When did she go away? Last summer it was. Can you tell me exactly when? A gentle clicking noise came from Poirot's right hand, where 2 half-crown coins jostled each other in a friendly fashion. The bleary-eyed woman softened in an almost magical manner and became graciousness itself. Well, I'm sure I'd like to help you, sir. Let's see now. August? No. Before that, July. Yes, July must have been. About the first week in July. She went off in a hurry, she did. Back to Italy, I believe. She was an Italian then. That's right, sir. And she was at one time lady's maid to a Russian dancer. Was she not? That's right. Madame Semolina, or some such name. She danced at the Thespian in this show everyone's so wild about. One of the stars she was. Do you know why Miss Valletta left her post? The woman hesitated before saying, couldn't say, I'm sure. She was dismissed, was she not? Well, I believe there was a bit of dust-up, but mind you, Miss Valletta didn't let on much about it. She wasn't one to give things away. She had a wicked temper, very Italian, her eyes all snapping and looking as if she'd put a knife into you. I wouldn't have crossed her when she was in one of your moods. Part 3. Ambrose Vandell, diverted from his enthusiastic account of the decor he was designing for a forthcoming ballet, supplied information easily enough. Sanderfield, George Sanderfield, nasty fellow, rolling in money, but they say he's a crook, dark horse, affair with a dancer, but of course, my dear, he had an affair with Katrina Samushenka. You must have seen her. Oh, too delicious. The Swan of Tululela, you must have seen that. And that other thing of Debussy, or was it Manin's La Biche à Bois? She danced with Michael Novgin. He's marvelous, isn't he? And she was a friend of Sir George Sanderfield. Yes, she used to weekend with him at his house on the river. Marvelous parties he gives. Would it be possible for you to introduce me to Mademoiselle Samushenka? But she isn't here any longer. She went to Paris or somewhere, quite suddenly. You know, they do say she was a Bolshevik spy or something. Not that I believed it myself. You know, people love saying things like that. Katrina always pretended she was a white Russian. Her father was a prince or a grand duke, the usual thing. It always goes down so much better. He paused and returned to the absorbing subject of himself. Now, as I was saying, if you want to get to the spirit of Bastille, you've got to steep yourself in the tradition. He continued happily. Part 4. Marie Helen looked swiftly at Poirot out of small, intelligent eyes, and as swiftly looked away again. She was the new maid. She said in smooth, even tones, but I remember perfectly, monsieur. I was engaged by Madame Samushenka the last week of June. Her former maid had departed in a hurry. Did you ever hear why that maid left? She went, suddenly. That's all I know. May have been an illness, something of that kind. Madame didn't say. Poirot said, did you find your mistress easy to get on with? The girl shrugged her shoulders. I was only her mistress while she was here, but she had great moods. She wept and laughed in turns. Sometimes she was so despondent she would not speak or eat, and sometimes she was wildly gay. They're like that, these dancers. It's temperament. Part 5. I always say you know everything, Alexis Pavlovich. Hercule Poirot murmured the words with his most flattering intonation. He was reflecting to himself that his third labor of Hercules had necessitated more traveling and more interviews than could have been imagined possible. The little matter of a missing lady's maid was proving one of the longest and most difficult problems he had ever tackled. Every clue, when examined, led exactly nowhere. It had brought him this evening to the Samovar restaurant in Paris, whose proprietor, Count Alexis Pavlovich, prided himself on knowing everything that went on in the artistic world. He nodded now complacently. Yes, my friend, I know. I always know. You ask me where she has gone. The little Samushenka, the exquisite dancer? Ah, she was the real thing, that little one. He kissed his fingertips. But fire and abandon. She would have gone far. She would have been the premier ballerina of her day. And then suddenly it all ends. She creeps away to the end of the world, and soon, so soon, we forget her. Where is she then? Demanded Poirot. In Switzerland, at Vaudreuil-les-Alpes. It is there that they go, those who have the little dry cough, and who grow thinner and thinner. She will die. Yes, surely she will die. She has a fatalistic nature. She will surely die. Poirot coughed to break the tragic spell. He wanted information. You do not by chance remember a maid she had, a maid called Nita Valletta. Valletta? I remember seeing a maid once at the station when I was seeing Katrina off to London. She was an Italian from Pisa, was she not? Yes, I'm sure. She was an Italian who came from Pisa. Hercule Poirot groaned. In that case, he said, I must now journey to Pisa. Part 6. Hercule Poirot stood in the Campo Santo at Pisa and looked down on a grave. So it was here that his quest had come to an end. Here by this humble mound of earth. Underneath it lay the joyous creature who had stirred the heart and imagination of a simple English mechanic. Was this perhaps the best end to that sudden strange romance? Now the girl who would live always in the young man's memory as he had seen her for those few enchanted hours on a June afternoon. The clash of opposing nationalities, of different standards, the pain of disillusionment, all that ruled out forever. Poirot shook his head sadly. His mind went back to his conversation with the Valletta family, the mother with her broad face, the upright, grief-stricken father, the dark, hard-lipped sister. It was sudden, Signor. It was very sudden, though for many years she had had pains on and off. The doctor gave us no choice. He said there must be an operation immediately for the appendicitis. He took her off to the hospital then and there. See, it was under the anesthetic she died. She never recovered consciousness. The mother sniffed, murmuring, Bianca was always such a clever girl. It's terrible that she should have died so young. Hercule Poirot repeated to himself, she died young. That was the message he must take back to the young man who had asked for his help so confidingly. She is not for you, my friend. She died young. His quest had ended, here where the leaning tower was silhouetted against the sky, and the first spring flowers were showing pale and creamy with their promise of life and joy to come. Was it the stirring of spring that made him feel so rebelliously disinclined to accept this final verdict? Or was it something else? Something stirring at the back of his brain? Words, a phrase, a name. Did not the whole thing finish too neatly, too obviously? Hercule Poirot sighed. He must take one more journey to put things beyond any possible doubt. He must go to Switzerland, to Vaudreuil-les-Alpes. Part 7. Here, he thought, really was the world's end. This shelf of snow, these scattered huts and shelters, in each of which lay a motionless human being fighting an insidious death. So he came at last to Katrina Samoushenka. When he saw her lying there with hollow cheeks, in each of which was a vivid red mark, and long, thin, emaciated hands stretched out on the coverlet, a memory stirred in him. He had not remembered her name, but he had seen her dance. He had been carried away and fascinated by the supreme art that can make you forget art. He remembered Michael Novgin, the hunter, leaping and twirling in that outrageous and fantastic forest that the brain of Ambrose Vandel had conceived. And he remembered the lovely flying deer, eternally pursued, eternally desirable, a golden, beautiful creature with horns on her head and twinkling bronze feet. He remembered her final collapse, shot and wounded, and Michael Novgin standing bewildered with the body of the slain deer in his arms. Katrina Samoushenka was looking at him with faint curiosity. She said, I have never seen you before, have I? What is it you want of me? Hercule Poirot made her a little bow. First, madame, I wish to thank you for your art, which made me for once an evening of beauty. She smiled faintly. But also, I am here on a matter of business. I have been looking, madame, for a long time for a certain maid of yours. Her name was Nita. Nita? She stared at him. Her eyes were large and startled. She said, What do you know about Nita? I will tell you. He told her of the evening when his car had broken down, and of Ted Williamson standing there twisting his cap between his fingers and stammering out his love and his pain. She listened with close attention. She said when he had finished, It is touching, that. Yes, it is touching. Hercule Poirot nodded. Yes, he said. 'Tis a tale of Arcadian, is it not? What can you tell me, madame, of this girl? Katrina Samushenko sighed. I had a maid. Juanita. She was lovely, yes. Light of heart. It happened to her what happens so often to those whom the gods favor. She died young. They had been Poirot's own words, final words, irrevocable words. And now he heard them again. And yet, he persisted. He asked, She is dead. Yes, she is dead. Hercule Poirot was silent for a minute, and then he said, There is one thing I do not quite understand. I asked this George Sanderfield about this maid of yours, and he said it was a different girl. Why was that? There was a faint expression of disgust on the dancer's face. You just said a maid of mine. It was Marie. She came later. She was an odious girl, inquisitive, always prying into letters and locked drawers. Poirot paused a moment, and then went on, still persistent. Juanita's other name was Valletta, and she died of an operation for appendicitis in Pisa. Is that correct? He noted the hesitation, hardly perceptible, but nevertheless there before the dancer bowed her head. Yes, that is right. Poirot said meditatively, and yet there is still a little point. Her family spoke of her not as Juanita, but as Bianca. Katrina shrugged her thin shoulders. She said, Bianca? Juanita, does it matter? I suppose her real name was Bianca, but she thought the name of Juanita was more romantic, and so chose to call herself by it. Ah, you think that? He paused, and then his voice changing, he said, For me, there is another explanation. What is it? Poirot leaned forward. He said, The girl that Ted Williamson saw had hair that he described as being like wings of gold. And he leaned still a little further forward, and his finger just touched the two springing waves of Katrina's gold hair. Wings of gold, like horns of gold. It is as you look at it. It is whether one sees you as a devil or an angel. You might be either, or they are perhaps only the golden horns of a stricken deer. Katrina murmured, Stricken deer. And her voice was a voice of one without hope. Poirot said, All along Ted Williamson's description has worried me. It brought something to my mind. That something was you, dancing on your twinkling bronze feet through the forest. Shall I tell you what I think, mademoiselle? I think there was a week when you had no maid, when you went down alone to Grasslawn, for Bianca Valletta had returned to Italy, and you had not yet engaged a new maid. Already you were feeling the illness which has since overtaken you, and you stayed in the house one day when the others went on an all-day excursion on a Grindy river. There was a ring at the door, and you went to it, and you saw... Shall I tell you what you saw? You saw a young man who was as simple as a child and as handsome as a god. And you invented for him a girl, Juanita. And for a few hours, you walked with him as if an Arcadian. There was a long pause. Katrina said in a low, hoarse voice, In one thing at least, I have told you the truth. I have given you the right end to the story. Nita will die young. No. Hercule Poirot was transformed. He struck his hand on the table. He was suddenly prosaic, mundane, practical. He said, It is quite unnecessary. You need not die. You can fight for your life, can you not, as well as any other? She shook her head, sadly, hopelessly. What life is there for me? Not the life of the stage, bien entendu, but think, there is another life. Come now, mademoiselle, be honest. Was your father really a prince, or a grand duke, or even a Russian general? She laughed suddenly. She said, He drove a delivery truck in Leningrad. Very good. And why should you not be the wife of a garage hand in a country village, and have children as beautiful as gods and with feet, perhaps, that will dance as you once danced? Katrina caught her breath. But the whole idea is fantastic. Nevertheless, Hercule Poirot said with great satisfaction, I believe it is going to come true. And that's the end of our story. I want to thank you all for joining me for these. It has been an absolute pleasure to tell you stories. And hopefully with some of that wisdom and perseverance and kindness of our own, we're getting to the end of where we are now, and we can be together again. So until then, be wise, be persistent, be kind to everyone you meet, including yourself.